The desert stretched endlessly under a copper sky, its silence broken only by the whisper of wind through brittle sage and the distant cry of a circling hawk. Thomas Macready squinted against the harsh afternoon sun, his weathered hands gripping the reins of his aging mare, Dusty. The leather was cracked like his own sun-beaten face, and both horse and rider bore the unmistakable marks of hard times. Macready's ranch lay 3 miles behind him, though calling it a ranch was generous. The cabin leaked when it rained, the fence posts leaned at precarious angles, and his cattle herd had dwindled to 12 head after a brutal winter. At 42, he felt twice that age, carrying the weight of failed harvests, unpaid debts, and a loneliness that gnawed at him worse than hunger. The saddlebags behind him contained his last provisions, a handful of jerky, 2 cans of beans, and a small sack of cornmeal that would have to last the week. He'd ridden to Clearwater Springs hoping to find work, but the town was struggling too. The silver mine had played out, taking most of the jobs with it. As Dusty picked her way carefully down a rocky slope, Macready's thoughts turned to the letter folded in his vest pocket. The bank in Santa Fe was losing patience. Another missed payment would mean losing everything. The land his father had died defending. The cabin his own hands had built, log by log. He'd sooner eat his boots than ask his brother in California for help, not after the things they'd said to each other. A movement caught his eye. Something that didn't belong in the monotony of rocks and scrub brush. 2 figures huddled in the meager shade of an ancient cottonwood, motionless as stones. Macready's hand instinctively moved to the Colt at his hip, then stopped. These weren't bandits or rustlers. They were too small, too still. As he drew closer, details emerged that made his chest tighten. 2 young Apache women, sisters by their similar features, sat pressed against the tree trunk. Their buckskin dresses were torn and dusty, their long black hair tangled with thorns. The younger one couldn't be more than 16, her sister perhaps 20. Both had the hollow-eyed look of people who hadn't eaten in days. Macready had seen plenty of Apache over the years, warriors, traders, even a few who worked the ranches. But these 2 were different, vulnerable, lost, the kind of loss that came from having nowhere left to go. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. The older sister's dark eyes tracked his every movement, alert despite her obvious exhaustion. She said something low in Apache to the younger girl, who stirred slightly, but didn't lift her head. "Easy now," Macready said softly, the way he might approach a wounded animal. "I'm not looking for trouble." The older sister straightened, her chin lifting with a pride that suffering hadn't broken. When she spoke, her English was clear, but heavily accented. "We want nothing from you, white man." "Didn't say you did." Macready studied their faces, seeing past the wariness to the desperate hunger beneath. His own empty belly cramped in sympathy. "But it looks like you could use some water, maybe something to eat." "We do not beg." "Wasn't offering charity." The lie came easily. "Was thinking maybe you could help me with something. These old hands aren't what they used to be. And I've got some mending needs doing back at my place. Fair trade, work for food." The woman's eyes narrowed, searching his face for deception. Macready kept his expression neutral, though inside he wondered what the hell he thought he was doing. 2 more mouths to feed when he could barely feed himself. But something about their dignified suffering struck a chord deep in his chest, a harmony with his own quiet desperation. "Your place," she said carefully. "How far?" 3 miles north. Small cabin, nothing fancy. Got a well with good water, though, and a roof that mostly keeps the rain out." The younger sister lifted her head then, hope flickering in her exhausted eyes. She whispered something urgent in Apache. The older woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "My name is Ayana," she said. "This is Casa, my sister. We will come, but only for work. We pay our way." "Thomas Macready. And that sounds fair to me." He helped them onto Dusty's back, walking alongside as they made their slow way across the desert. Neither woman spoke during the journey, but he felt their eyes studying everything: the lay of the land, potential escape routes, his own movements. Smart. In their position, he'd do the same. The cabin squatted low against the evening sky when they finally reached it, humble but solid. MacCready had built it to last, using techniques his father had taught him and stones pulled from his own land. A vegetable garden struggled behind a chicken wire fence, and his small herd of cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the fading light. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with his father's rifle mounted above it. A rough wooden table sat beneath the single window, flanked by 2 chairs MacCready had carved himself. His bed occupied the far corner, separated from the main room by a blanket hung on a rope. "You can sleep in the barn," he told them, lighting a kerosene lamp. "It's clean, and there's fresh straw. I'll bring out some blankets." Ayanna nodded, still wary, but no longer hostile. Casa had said nothing since they arrived, but her eyes darted everywhere, taking in details with the intensity of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. MacCready opened one of his precious cans of beans and set it over the fire, adding water and a pinch of salt. The smell filled the small space, rich and promising. He cut thick slices from his last loaf of bread, hard but edible when softened in the bean broth. "It's not much," he said, ladling the simple meal into tin bowls, "but it'll fill the empty spaces." The sisters ate with careful dignity, making the small portions last. MacCready watched them over his own bowl, noting how Ayanna repeatedly pushed more food toward her younger sister, eating only what Casa couldn't finish. The gesture reminded him painfully of his mother during the lean years after his father's death. "Tell me," he said, setting down his spoon. "How do you come to be out there alone?" Ayanna's jaw tightened. "That is not your concern." "Maybe not. But if I'm taking you in, even for work, I need to know what I might be getting into. Are people looking for you? Are you running from something?" A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Casa spoke for the first time since they'd arrived, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our band was attacked. Soldiers came in the night. Many died." "Casa," Ayanna warned, but her sister continued. "We ran into the desert. Been walking for 6 days. No food, little water. We thought we would die under the great tree." MacCready felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What soldiers? When did this happen?" 5 days passed, blue coats from the fort. They said we harbored hostiles, but there were only old men and children in our camp. They burned everything." Casa's voice broke slightly. Everything. The weight of their story hung heavy in the lamplight. MacCready had heard rumors of increased military activity, settlers claiming Apache raids that might or might not have happened. The cycle of violence and retaliation had been spinning faster lately, catching innocence in its grinding gears. "I'm sorry," he said simply, because what else was there to say? Ayanna met his eyes, and for the first time, her guard dropped slightly. "Why do you help us? Your people and mine. We are enemies." MacCready considered the question, turning it over like a stone in his palm. "My father used to say that a man's measured by what he does when nobody's watching. Out there under that tree, nobody would have known if I'd ridden past. But I would have known." He stood, collecting the empty bowls. "Besides, seems to me we're all just trying to survive out here. Apache, Mexican, white. The desert doesn't much care what color you are when it's killing you." That night, MacCready lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of his land. Wind through the eaves, the distant lowing of cattle, coyotes singing their wild songs to the stars. But underneath it all, he heard something new. The soft murmur of voices from the barn as the sisters spoke in their native tongue, planning perhaps, or simply comforting each other. He'd given them his word about work, but the truth was he could barely afford to feed himself, let alone 2 others. Still, something told him this was bigger than a simple business arrangement. These women had been thrust into his life for a reason, and he had the unsettling feeling that reason hadn't yet revealed itself. Morning came with the harsh brightness of desert sunrise. McCready woke to find Ayanna already working in his struggling garden, her sure hands coaxing life from plants he'd nearly given up on. Casa sat nearby, mending a tear in his work shirt with neat, precise stitches. "Didn't expect you to start so early," he said, accepting a cup of coffee Ayanna had somehow managed to make despite his depleted supplies. "We pay our debts," she replied, not looking up from the tomato plants she was carefully staking. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. The sisters worked with quiet efficiency, transforming his failing homestead with skills he'd never possessed. Ayanna had a gift with growing things, while Casa could mend or improve almost anything she put her hands to. His clothes were cleaner than they'd been in months, his cabin organized in ways that made daily life easier. More importantly, the crushing loneliness that had become his constant companion began to lift. Conversations over simple meals revealed intelligent, complex women who'd been educated in both Apache and American ways. Ayanna spoke 4 languages and could read English better than many white settlers. Casa had an artist's eye, sketching intricate patterns in the dirt that spoke of a culture rich in beauty and meaning. But the outside world wouldn't stay away forever. On the 4th morning, McCready was repairing fence posts when he spotted dust on the southern horizon. A lone rider approached at a steady pace, and his heart sank as he recognized the black gelding and military bearing. Captain James Morrison from Fort Collins, a man who saw Apache problems as nails requiring the hammer of military force. "Thomas?" Morrison called out as he drew near, his blue uniform crisp despite the dust. "How are you holding up out here?" "Well enough, Captain. What brings you to my corner of nowhere?" Morrison dismounted, his pale eyes scanning the improved homestead with interest. "Looking for a couple of Apache women. Sisters, we think. They escaped during a recent action against hostiles. Command believes they might have intelligence about planned attacks." McCready's face remained carefully neutral. "Apache women? Haven't seen any. Why would they come here?" "Desperate people do desperate things. These two have been living rough for almost a week. They'd need food, water, shelter." Morrison's gaze fixed on McCready's face. "You sure you haven't seen anything unusual?" "Oh, just the usual struggles of a failing ranch, I'm afraid. Not much excitement out here." The captain nodded slowly, but his eyes continued to roam the property. "Mind if I look around?" "Won't take long." McCready's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice level. "Course not, though I'm not sure what you expect to find." As Morrison began his inspection, McCready caught a glimpse of movement in the barn's hayloft. The sisters were hidden there, he knew, but even the best hiding place wouldn't stand up to a thorough military search. His mind raced through options, each one ending in disaster. Then Casa made the decision for all of them. She dropped gracefully from the loft, landing silently behind Morrison as he examined the barn's interior. Before the captain could react, she had a knife pressed to his throat and his sidearm in her free hand. "Do not move," she said calmly. Morrison froze, his face flushing with anger and embarrassment. "You're making this worse for yourselves. Release me, and I'll ensure you're treated fairly. The way you treated our elders, our children." Ayanna had emerged from the shadows, her own weapon drawn. "We know about your fair treatment." McCready stepped between them, hands raised peacefully. "Let's all take a breath here. Captain Morrison, these women aren't hostiles. They're refugees from that attack you mentioned. They came here looking for work, nothing more. They're harboring intelligence about planned raids. They're hungry sisters trying not to die in the desert." McCready cut him off. "Look at them, Captain. Really look. Do they seem like military threats to you?" Morrison's eyes flicked between the two women, perhaps seeing for the first time their youth, their obvious exhaustion, the careful way they held themselves, despite their show of defiance. Intelligence indicates jack shit, and you know it. You attacked a peaceful band based on rumors and settler paranoia. Now you're trying to justify it by hunting down survivors. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunpowder blast. McCready had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, but something in him had snapped at the thought of these women being dragged back to face military justice for the crime of surviving. Morrison's face darkened. You're harboring fugitives, Thomas. That's a federal crime. Then arrest me, but they stay here. A tense silence stretched between them. Morrison was outnumbered and outgunned, but he had the full weight of the U.S. Army behind him. Eventually, he would win this confrontation through sheer force. Unless... "Captain," Ayanna said suddenly, lowering her weapon, "I wish to speak with your commanding officer." "Ayanna, no," McCready protested, but she silenced him with a look. "Not to surrender, to negotiate. My father was War Chief Nalnish of the Chiricahua. I carry his authority in matters of peace." Morrison's eyebrows rose. Everyone in the territory knew that name. Nalnish had been a respected leader, one of the few Apache chiefs who'd managed to maintain relative peace with the encroaching Americans through careful diplomacy and strategic thinking. "Your father is dead," Morrison said. "Killed in the engagement last week." Pain flashed across Ayanna's face, quickly masked. "Then his authority passes to me, as his eldest child. Apache law recognizes this, as does American law when it suits you. What are you proposing?" "Safe passage to Fort Collins. I will speak with your colonel about terms for peace in this region. Real peace, not the fragile truces that break with every misunderstanding." Morrison considered this, clearly torn between his orders and the political opportunity she was offering. A negotiated peace would look much better in his service record than a massacre of innocents. "And if the colonel refuses your terms? Then we fight, and more good men die on both sides. But at least we will have tried the path of wisdom first." The captain holstered his weapon, a sign of grudging respect. "I'll take you to the fort, but the other one stays here as surety for your good faith. She comes with me, or there is no negotiation." Another long pause. Finally, Morrison nodded. "Both of you, then. But Thomas here guarantees your peaceful intentions. If you betray that trust, his ranch burns." McCready felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "Understood, Captain. But I know these women. Their word is good." 3 days later, the most unlikely delegation in territorial history rode toward Fort Collins. A struggling rancher, 2 Apache sisters, and a cavalry captain who still couldn't quite believe what he was doing. Word had somehow spread ahead of them, and by the time they reached the fort's gates, a crowd had gathered. Colonel Harrison was a career soldier, silver-haired and bearing the scars of countless frontier campaigns. He received them in his office, a spartanly furnished room dominated by maps and military dispatches. His aide, Lieutenant Porter, stood at attention beside the desk, clearly uncomfortable with the unprecedented situation. "Miss..." Harrison paused, uncertain of protocol. "I am Ayanna, daughter of War Chief Nalnish, speaker for the scattered bands of our people." Her voice carried a formal dignity that transformed the small office into something resembling a treaty hall. "I see. And you wish to discuss terms for peace?" "I wish to discuss terms for survival. Yours and ours." Harrison's weathered face showed surprise at her directness. "Explain." Ayanna stepped forward, her bearing regal despite her simple dress and the dust of travel. "Your soldiers attack our camps, claiming we harbor hostiles. Our young men retaliate by raiding settlements. Settlers demand protection, so you send more soldiers. The spiral grows tighter until it strangles us all. The raids must stop," Harrison said firmly. "The attacks on peaceful camps must stop first. You cannot kill our children and expect our warriors to remain calm." The colonel leaned back in his chair, studying her with the calculating gaze of a man who'd spent decades reading enemies across negotiating tables. What do you propose? A zone of peace. Land set aside where Apache families can live without fear, where we can rebuild what your war has destroyed. In return, we police our own people. Any warrior who breaks the peace answers to Apache justice, not American bullets. And how do I know you have the authority to speak for all Apache? Ayanna's chin lifted. Because I am prepared to stake my life on it. If any band under my father's influence breaks this peace, you may do with me as you see fit. Lieutenant Porter shifted uncomfortably. Colonel, we can't base military policy on the word of what, Lieutenant? Ayanna's voice cut like a blade. Of a savage? Of someone you consider less than human? Harrison raised a hand for silence. The lieutenant misspoke. Please continue. The zone I propose lies along the northern valley near the McCready Ranch. It has water, some grazing land, and is far enough from major settlements to ease white fears. In return for this land, Apache bands will report to a designated agent monthly, will not leave the zone without permission, and will turn over any warrior who breaks the peace terms. McCready felt his heart sink. His ranch sat right in the middle of the area she was describing. Everything he'd worked for, everything his father had died protecting, would become part of an Apache reservation. Harrison must have seen his expression. Mr. McCready, this arrangement would require your cooperation. Your thoughts? All eyes turned to McCready. He thought of his father's dream, of the banknote in his pocket, of the choice between losing his land to creditors or giving it up for something larger than himself. The Apache aren't the only ones struggling to survive out here, he said finally. Maybe it's time we tried helping each other instead of just getting in each other's way. The negotiation continued through the day and into the evening. Maps were consulted, boundaries drawn, terms refined and debated. Harrison proved surprisingly willing to consider the proposal, perhaps recognizing that his current approach was costing far more in blood and resources than it was gaining in security. As sunset painted the office walls gold, they had the framework of an agreement. The northern valley would become a protected zone where Apache families could settle. McCready would remain on his ranch as unofficial liaison and agricultural advisor. The military would establish a small outpost to monitor the arrangement, but would not interfere in internal Apache affairs unless the peace was broken. There's one more thing, Harrison said as they prepared to formalize the terms. The territorial governor will need to approve this arrangement. And frankly, public opinion isn't favorable toward any plan that could be seen as rewarding Apache aggression. Ayanna nodded gravely. I understand. What do you suggest? A demonstration. Something to show that this isn't capitulation but genuine partnership. The Harvest Festival is next month in Clearwater Springs. If Apache families participated, showed their commitment to peaceful coexistence, it might change minds. The idea was radical, potentially dangerous. The townspeople of Clearwater Springs included many who'd lost family to Apache raids, real or imagined. Bringing Apache families into their celebration would be like lighting a fuse and hoping the powder keg wouldn't explode. It could work, McCready said slowly. If folks could see Apache as neighbors instead of threats, as families just trying to make a living like everyone else. Or it could start a riot, Lieutenant Porter muttered. Then we make sure it doesn't, Harrison said firmly. Miss Ayanna, are you willing to take that risk? She looked at her sister, seeing something in Casa's slight nod that gave her strength. We have already lost everything once. What is one more gamble against the chance of a future for our people? The weeks that followed tested everyone's resolve. Word of the proposed peace agreement spread through the territory like wildfire, generating heated debate in saloons, churches, and newspaper editorial pages. Some praised the innovative approach. Others condemned it as weakness in the face of savage aggression. Meanwhile, Apache families began arriving in the northern valley. Small groups at first, then larger bands as word spread through the scattered remnants of Nalnish's people. They came in wagons when they could find them, on foot when they couldn't, carrying everything they owned in bundles and packs. McCready found his role as liaison more challenging than he'd expected. Language barriers were only part of the problem. Cultural differences ran deeper than he'd imagined. Apache concepts of property ownership, authority, and social organization often clashed with American assumptions. But gradually, understanding grew on both sides. Ayanna proved herself an able leader, settling disputes with wisdom beyond her years and maintaining discipline among the younger warriors who chafed at the restrictions of reservation life. Kesa used her artistic talents to teach Apache children, preserving their cultural heritage while also introducing them to American ways they'd need to survive in the changing world. The Harvest Festival loomed like a storm on the horizon, its approach generating increasingly heated rhetoric from both sides. A delegation from the Territorial Citizens Council visited Fort Collins, demanding that the colonel abandon his foolish experiment before it led to massacre. Apache warriors, meanwhile, questioned why they should humble themselves before people who'd shown them nothing but hostility. 3 days before the festival, crisis struck. A ranch 20 miles south of the valley was raided. Horses stolen, buildings burned, 1 man wounded. The description of the attackers was vague, but tracks led north toward Apache lands. Harrison summoned Ayanna to the fort immediately. McCready rode with her, dreading what this meant for their fragile peace. "The evidence points to Apache involvement," the colonel said without preamble. 3 horses stolen, bearing Apache markings. The wounded man described war paint and traditional weapons. Ayanna's face remained impassive, but McCready could see the tension in her rigid posture. "Which band? What markings?" "Unknown. But it came from your territory, which makes you responsible under our agreement." The room fell silent except for the tick of the colonel's clock. Outside, McCready could hear the routine sounds of fort life: soldiers drilling, horses being fed, the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer. Normal sounds of a normal day, while inside this office, the future balanced on a knife's edge. "I need 3 days," Ayanna said finally. "Time to investigate, to find the truth. The festival is in 3 days. If Apache raiders are active, I can't guarantee the safety of any Apache who attend. Then you're abandoning the peace before it has a chance to succeed." Harrison's jaw tightened. "I'm protecting innocent lives. If you can't control your own people, I can, but I need time to prove it." McCready stepped forward. "Colonel, what if the raid wasn't Apache at all? What if someone's trying to sabotage the peace?" Lieutenant Porter scoffed. "Who else would it be? Anyone who profits from conflict? Gun runners, whiskey traders, land speculators betting on war to drive down property values. Hell, even settlers looking to grab Apache territory once the savages are cleared out." Harrison considered this, his experienced eyes weighing possibilities. "You have evidence of such a conspiracy?" "No direct evidence, but the timing's convenient, and the raid was just dramatic enough to derail the peace process without causing massive retaliation." A long silence settled over the room. Finally, Harrison nodded grudgingly. "Very well, 3 days, Miss Ayanna. But if you can't produce the real raiders or convincing proof of Apache innocence, the agreement is void." That night, McCready sat on his porch watching stars emerge over the valley where Apache cook fires twinkled like earthbound constellations. The weight of impending failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. So close to something that could change everything, and now it might all collapse because of 3 stolen horses and 1 wounded rancher. Footsteps approached through the darkness. Ayanna emerged from the shadows, her face grave in the lamplight. "Any luck with your investigation?" he asked. "Some. The tracks were too clean, too obvious, as if someone wanted them to be found and followed." "That's not much to take to the colonel." "No, but there is something else." She sat beside him on the rough wooden steps. "Casa spoke with the children today. Sometimes they hear things adults miss, see things others overlook. And? A boy named Chato was hunting rabbits 2 days ago near the southern boundary. He saw men on horses, but they weren't Apache. White men, but dressed to look like raiders. They painted their faces crudely, nothing like real war paint. McCready felt a spark of hope. Would the boy testify? Tell his story to the colonel? He's frightened. These men, whoever they are, they're dangerous. If they discover he saw them. We'll protect him. But Ayanna, this could save the peace. She was quiet for a long moment, studying the star-scattered sky. There's something you should know, Thomas, about why this matters so much to me. He waited, sensing the weight of whatever she was about to share. My father spent his last years believing peace was possible. He died trying to protect a vision of Apache and white living side by side, sharing the land instead of fighting over it. If this fails, if the cycle of violence continues, then his sacrifice means nothing. The pain in her voice cut through McCready like a blade. He understood now why she'd risked everything on this desperate gamble. It wasn't just about survival. It was about honoring the dreams of the dead. It won't fail, he said with more conviction than he felt. We'll make it work. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to McCready's ranch. 4 men rode up in a cloud of dust, their faces hard beneath wide-brimmed hats. The leader, a thick-set man with calculating eyes, dismounted and approached the porch where McCready sat cleaning his rifle. "Name's Garrett," the man said without preamble. "Here you're cozy with the Apache now. I'm helping implement a peace agreement, if that's what you mean." "Peace," Garrett spat in the dust. "Fancy word for surrender. Some of us don't think much of your arrangement, McCready." "Then take it up with the colonel. It's his agreement." "Maybe we will, but first we thought we'd give you a chance to see reason. This Apache reservation idea is bad for business, bad for the territory. People get nervous when savages are allowed to roam free." McCready set down his rifle but kept it within easy reach. "These people aren't roaming free. They're trying to rebuild their lives under American supervision. For now. But what happens when they get restless? When some young buck decides he wants to count coup on a few settlers? The same thing that happens when white men break the law. They face justice." Garrett's companions had spread out slightly, a subtle but unmistakable tactical positioning. Professional trouble, McCready realized. Not random settlers, but men accustomed to violence. "Justice," Garrett repeated. "Interesting word. See, we hear there was some Apache justice just 2 days ago. A ranch got hit. Horses stolen. Funny how that happened right before this big peace celebration." Something cold settled in McCready's chest. "You seem to know a lot about that raid." "Man hears things. Maybe those Apache of yours aren't as peaceful as you think." "Maybe. Or maybe someone wanted folks to think Apache were involved." Garrett's eyes hardened. "Careful, McCready. That sounds like you're questioning the word of honest ranchers." "I'm questioning the timing. Convenient how this raid happened just when it would cause maximum damage to the peace process." "Convenient for who?" "Anyone who profits from conflict. Gun runners, for instance. Hard to sell rifles to settlers if there's no Indian threat to worry about." The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. Garrett's hand drifted toward his holstered pistol, and McCready tensed. But before the situation could escalate, another voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Ayanna stepped around the corner of the cabin, her rifle trained on Garrett's chest. Behind her, 3 Apache warriors emerged from concealment, their own weapons ready. Garrett cursed under his breath, recognizing how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. "You're making enemies you can't afford, McCready." "Maybe, but I'm also making friends. Seems to me friends are more valuable in the long run." The gun runners, for that's clearly what they were, backed toward their horses, hands carefully visible. Garrett paused before mounting, his face twisted with frustrated anger. "This isn't over. That peace festival of yours is 3 days away. Lot can happen in 3 days." They rode off in a thundercloud of dust and poorly concealed threats. McCready watched until they disappeared over a ridge, then turned to Ayana. Well, that was illuminating. Indeed, Chato was right. White men painted as Apache. Now we know why. Knowing and proving are different things. We need evidence the Colonel will accept. Then we get evidence. Tonight. The plan was desperate, dangerous, and probably stupid. But it was also their only chance to save the peace before Garrett and his associates could sabotage it completely. Under cover of darkness, McCready and 2 Apache warriors, Silent Fox and Ironhawk, followed the gunrunners' trail south toward the raided ranch. If Garrett's men were responsible for the attack, they might return to the scene to plant more evidence or stage another raid to coincide with the festival. The night was moonless, perfect for covert movement but challenging for tracking. They followed game trails and dry washes, staying off the main routes where they might encounter patrols or other travelers. McCready's respect for his Apache companions grew with each mile. They moved through the darkness like shadows, reading sign that was invisible to his eyes. Near midnight, they reached the vicinity of the attacked ranch. The buildings sat dark and empty, the owner having fled to town after the raid. But light flickered in the distance, a small campfire hidden in a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. They crept closer, bellies to the ground, until voices became audible. "Should hit them tomorrow night during the festival," one man was saying. "While all the attention's on the celebration, we torch the Apache camp. Make it look like retaliation for the raid." "What about the soldiers?" another voice asked. "They'll be in town, keeping peace at the festival. Won't have enough men to protect both places." McCready's blood ran cold. Not content with sabotaging the peace negotiations, Garrett planned to massacre the Apache families while the men were away trying to build bridges with the white community. "The territorial governor's already skeptical about this peace deal," Garrett's voice continued. "Once we burn out these Apache, he'll have all the excuse he needs to void the agreement and clear out the whole valley. Then the land goes up for auction, nice and cheap. Land speculation. Of course, the oldest game in the American West. Create conflict, drive out the current inhabitants, buy up the territory for pennies on the dollar, then sell it to newcomers once the Indian problem was solved." Silent Fox touched McCready's arm and pointed. More men were moving around the camp than they'd initially seen, at least 8, possibly 10. Too many to confront directly, but maybe enough to provide the evidence Colonel Harrison needed. They spent another hour gathering intelligence, memorizing faces and recording overheard details. But as they prepared to withdraw, disaster struck. Ironhawk accidentally dislodged a loose stone, sending it tumbling down the creek bank with a noise that seemed thunderous in the night silence. "What was that?" someone called from the camp. "Probably just a coyote. Keep your voice down." But Garrett wasn't satisfied. "Nate, take a look around. Make sure we're alone." Footsteps approached their hiding place. McCready held his breath, pressing himself deeper into the shadows. Beside him, Silent Fox had become absolutely motionless, a human statue carved from darkness. The footsteps paused directly above them. A beam of lamplight swept back and forth, probing the darkness. Any second now. Ironhawk exploded from concealment, tackling the searcher before he could raise an alarm. They went down hard, rolling in a tangle of limbs and muffled curses. But the damage was done. Shouts erupted from the camp as the gunrunners realized they had company. "Run!" McCready hissed, but Silent Fox was already moving, his warrior's instincts overriding any thought of retreat. Instead, he charged toward the camp, rifle blazing, buying time for his companions to escape. McCready found himself following, his own weapon speaking fire into the darkness. Years of careful planning collapsed into chaos as the night exploded with muzzle flashes and shouted orders. He saw Silent Fox go down, clutching a wounded arm. Ironhawk was still grappling with his opponent near the creek, and somewhere in the confusion, Garrett's voice was bellowing orders to surround and capture the intruders. A bullet whined past McCready's ear, close enough to part his hair. He dove behind a fallen log, trying to assess the tactical situation. 3 against 8 or more, caught in the open with minimal cover. The professional assessment was grim. Then salvation arrived in the form of Apache war cries echoing across the valley. Ayanna had brought reinforcements, a dozen warriors who swept down on the gun runners' camp like an avenging wind. The fight was brief but decisive. Caught between McCready's group and the new arrivals, Garrett's men found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered. 3 surrendered immediately, hands reaching for the sky. 2 others tried to run, but were quickly ridden down by mounted Apache. Only Garrett himself remained defiant, his pistol blazing until it clicked empty. "It's over, Garrett," McCready called out, rising from cover. "Throw down your weapons and we'll see you get a fair trial." "Fair trial?" Garrett laughed bitterly. "From who? Apache savages and their white traitor friends?" "From the United States Army, under territorial law. Colonel Harrison's a fair man. You'll get justice." "Justice." The word dripped with contempt. "You think you've won something here, McCready? This is just the beginning. There's more of us than you know, and we don't give up easy." "Maybe not," McCready thought as Apache warriors secured the prisoners. But tonight had proven something important. When people of goodwill worked together, they could overcome those who profited from hatred and division. The ride back to Fort Collins was a subdued affair. Silent Fox's wound wasn't serious, but Ironhawk had taken a bullet in the leg that would keep him laid up for weeks. The prisoners rode in sullen silence, their dreams of easy money dissolved in the harsh light of consequence. Colonel Harrison listened to their report with growing amazement. The evidence was overwhelming: maps of the valley showing planned raids, correspondence with territorial officials discussing land purchases, even a detailed timeline for provoking Apache retaliation. "Gentlemen," he said finally, addressing the captured gun runners, "you've just provided me with everything I need to make this peace agreement permanent. The territorial governor will find it hard to argue against an arrangement that's prevented a massacre and exposed a criminal conspiracy." Garrett spat on the colonel's office floor. "You're fools, all of you. Peace with savages never lasts. They'll turn on you first chance they get." "Maybe," Harrison replied. "But people like you never give them that chance, do you? You stir up trouble at every opportunity, then point to the violence as proof that peace is impossible." The festival proceeded 3 days later, transformed from a desperate gamble into a genuine celebration. Apache families came to Clearwater Springs not as supplicants or curiosities, but as neighbors. Children played together while their parents shared techniques for growing crops in the harsh desert soil. Apache women demonstrated traditional weaving methods. White settlers showed off the latest farming equipment from back east. There were tense moments, of course. Old prejudices didn't die easily, and some townspeople remained suspicious of their new neighbors. But the arrest of the gun runners had changed the atmosphere considerably. Evidence of the conspiracy to sabotage peace had shifted public opinion, making supporters of many who'd initially opposed the agreement. McCready stood at the edge of the celebration, watching Ayanna help serve food to a mixed crowd of Apache and white children. She caught his eye and smiled, and in that smile he saw something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope for a future where different peoples might actually learn to live together. "You did good, son," a voice said behind him. He turned to find an elderly Apache man, his face seamed with age and wisdom. Despite his simple clothes, there was something unmistakably regal about his bearing. "I don't believe we've met," McCready said. "Nalnish," the old man replied. "Ayanna's grandfather. Not her father, as she claimed. Her father died when she was young, but she needed the authority of a war chief's daughter to make her words carry weight." McCready felt the pieces clicking into place. "You've been guiding her from the beginning." "A grandfather guides, but the young must find their own path. She chose this course herself, chose to risk everything for the possibility of peace." "It's working, isn't it? The peace, I mean." Nalnish nodded slowly. "Today, yes. Tomorrow will bring new challenges. But my granddaughter has planted seeds that may grow into something lasting. That is all any of us can do." plant seeds, and trust others to tend them. As the sun set over the celebration, painting the desert sky in shades of gold and crimson, McCready found himself thinking about seeds and the future they might grow into. His ranch was no longer just his own, it had become a bridge between two peoples, a place where understanding could flourish despite generations of mistrust. The banknote in his pocket no longer mattered. He'd found something more valuable than land ownership: purpose. A reason to build rather than just survive. Ayanna approached as the crowd began to disperse, her face glowing with exhaustion and satisfaction. "So," she said, "what happens now?" McCready considered the question, looking out over the valley where Apache and white families were beginning to build a shared future. "Now we go home," he said, "and we get back to work."